watching a master at work.
Hey. Wow. Thank you very much. Thank you. Welcome to another episode of Hidden Figures Behind the Numbers with the Restaurant Scientist. I am Jason Wallace, and I am the Restaurant Scientist. Yes. I want to thank our sponsors, Cornerstone Business Labs, Cornerstone Production, and Cornerstone Media. Without them, none of this would be possible. So we're recognizing Women's History Month, and I have a special guest on today who is tremendous. Her name is Therese Nelson. Therese Nelson is a chef, writer, and steward of Black culinary history. Therese, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jason, for having me.
So, when you start thinking about and understanding a website and digital archiving of Black history and culinary arts and our role in the shaping of American cuisine and the Atlantic diaspora of food and travel and culture of people, no one could speak better to that than Therese Nelson. Therese, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your background. I know you're a Johnson & Wales grad. Shout out to Johnson J&W. And so tell a little bit about you.
Sure. So again, my name is Therese Nelson. So I'm a 20-year veteran of the culinary industry. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. In the days when we were. That's right. Damn right. And it's a tricky city to be from. I think folks in places like Detroit, Chicago, even New York, for that matter, have a similar story of being in a place where people's kind of imagination on possibility in that town is sort of limited, or they sort of have a preconceived idea of what that place is. And I think growing up, I don't think I appreciated the cultural significance of a place like Newark until I left and came back. But I grew up in a neighborhood where, like, 2 blocks over, Amir Baraka was living and thriving, right? I grew in a neighborhood where all of the city council people were Black in my neighborhood. But that was juxtaposed with 2 blocks up being, pretty intense, sort of drug kind of, I don't know, it's a very particular urban city. And so you juxtapose cultural significance with a very sort of specific urban outlook.
Absolutely.
But also I'm a kid of like the late 90s where like technology is becoming a viable option. You sort of training students to go into tech in some form because there was a sense that this was going to be the sort of best option professionally. And up until my senior year of high school, I thought that I was going to be a computer engineer. I had been in sort of academically rigorous, but very tech-centric programs all through high school. Thought I was going to go to Rutgers. It was a state school. Just a very clear pathway to what my adult life was going to look like.
Right.
And it was so interesting to watch these adults who were so sure about and so passionate about tech as mentors.
Right.
And I realized that I was not as passionate as any of these people, that I was about to sign my life over to this profession that I certainly could be good at and certainly be proficient at, but I'm certainly not as passionate as the folks around me. And I think, again, the timing is really particular because you're talking about the advent of sort of cable networks becoming prevalent, Food Network just started, sort of food becoming part of the zeitgeist in a more intentional way. Yep. And so visibly, I was sort of saying, that's when, I don't know if anybody, again, age-wise, remembering that like 2000 era, like all the culinary schools would advertise on television.
Absolutely.
There just was this sense of
sitting at home watching TV at 2:00 in the morning, and the infomercial was, "What are you going to do with your life? How about culinary arts and pastries? How about the New York Restaurant School downtown?" Yeah, absolutely. So I live in Newark. My boy is actually, we got a shout out, so I got to do Brick City shout out.
Hey.
I would not be able to go home if I didn't shout out Brick City, Technology High School, Barringer High School, Science Park High School, where all
University
my kids,
High School.
University High School, Ridge Street School, Ridge Street Tigers over there. So shout out to Newark. I've been living in Newark 40 years now, and my kids born and raised and grew up in that area as well. So, but yeah, there was a time when on an infomercial you'd be watching television and they'd tell you, go to a trade school and get that culinary degree. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think also for me it was not having any real reference point for the culinary industry or sort of possibilities in it, but sort of feeling a calling towards it. And my mother, what like good parents do, but single parent especially, and having not a lot of reference point for this thing I'm passionate about, but having a reference point for it. She did what you're supposed to do. We got all the information you could. At the time, as you said, New York Restaurant School was proximal to Newark. I mean, I could have easily gone there, but I think also wanted to leave home and sort of have a different kind of experience. And also, at the time, there weren't a lot of schools that were offering degrees. I was going to have to justify to my mother giving a actual degree with scholarships to Rutgers and a trade school certificate. Right. So trying to find a program that was as rigorous and sort of was going to give me options was a big deal. And so when we found Johnson Wales, it was a no-brainer for me. But I think the process of culinary school and those early days of trying to figure out what my lane was going to be in the sort of food space was so particular. There was such a coded, subliminal sort of messaging about possibility, about mobility. You in culinary school, you don't see professors who reflect you. You are taking those first jobs out of school where your bosses don't look like you. I always wanted to be a caterer, so working in hotels mainly to sort of get the lay of that kind of foundational catering landscape, watching chefs who were holding down these operations, who had been in their job 30 and 40 years, had sent their kids to college and all of these things, all these wonderful things that this industry gives you, but had no possibility and no sense of urgency about upward mobility. And I don't know that I think that at the time I wasn't as sort of, it didn't strike me as how strange it was and how coded that was about the limitations of possibility. And so, I don't know, culinary school was amazing and I used every bit of my training, my professional life, but those early days really did set the tone for the questions that I would begin to ask myself about identity.
Got you. So then you come out of culinary school and then you move into private chefing, right? So
not directly. I mean, I worked a lot. The first 5 or 6 years I was in hotels. I worked Four Seasons, and I ended up moving back to New York to work at Four Seasons, and really loved it. But I feel like if anybody's remembering like the sort of mid 2000s where all of a sudden brands were starting to realize that Black people just, had actual income and actually enjoy dining well. And you should be marketing to and talking to people of color. Right. I ended up forming a small catering company as a tangential business to a company that this company was started and that was marketing directly to Black women. And we were thinking about the fact that you, as a Black woman, should know how to cook. This is not Sex and the City, right? You should know how to feed yourself, and at the same skill sets that you use in, navigating career and navigating sort of, it was like this lifestyle idea of the kitchen not being this oppressive space, but that culturally speaking, teaching women in our demographic to cook would be exponentially powerful.
Right, absolutely.
So we sort of were self-publishing these books and derivatively started catering around the publishing. So we started this really small company out of that.
Got you. So basically you get classically trained in culinary arts, and then you work at some of these higher and exclusive locations, restaurants, hotels. And at what point did you then pivot and say, okay, well, what about my culture? What about our history? What about, those that blazed a trail prior to me and creating what we know as American cuisine and worldly cuisines and flavors and profiles?
Sure. It really was '08. It was, I think the economic downturn was a big deal for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think similar to now. I think it forces you to recalibrate the choices that you make. And this is a hard industry to be a part of. You give yourself over to it so fully. And when you're sort of confronted with your why and you don't have very good answers, that's a gut check that you have to really contend with. I think a big part of that, like that late '08, early '09 era for me was I was cooking for and around Black people. I was starting to think about what cuisine was going to look like in my own practice, outside the context of other people's businesses and sort of the fine dining space. What was I going to cook? What was I going to express about who I was and where I came from? And I didn't have good answers. Right. I was doing a disservice. I was reckless in how I was able to contextualize our foodways because I didn't know better. Right. And it wasn't, I don't know, I don't think that it's fair to suggest that it was for lack of information, because I think so often we start to talk about, we can certainly condemn culinary schools for not being expansive in the ways that they think about Black culture. We can certainly talk about publishing and the fact that a lot of cookbooks don't get particularly expansive. But I don't know that if you actually looking, you wouldn't have examples. Right. I mean, 25th and Martin's Jemima Code shows us 250 years of cookbooks of information that tell us a story about who we are and what our food meant to this country. Right. And so the content is there. I guess to your point of your podcast, right, hidden in plain sight is sort of there for us, only are you actually looking for it? Right. And when I realized that I hadn't been looking and didn't have the tools to really contextualize our foodways, I had to start someplace. Right.
No, absolutely. Hidden figures, those hidden figures, that hidden information that, like you say, out there in plain sight. So again, for the listeners to understand, what Chef is saying is that, we understand who we are, we understand what we do, we understand how we do it. But when we start to ask ourselves, why do we exist, right? Why do we do what we do? Now you're coming from a place that is internal. Like, so for me right now, it's about advocacy. It's about advocacy to feed my soul. It's not even about a revenue stream. It's about, I do what I do. Why I do it is because I want to uplift my people. I want to highlight our contributions. I want to highlight people like Chef Therese and others. So that why is, if you don't ask yourself why, you're lying to yourself. And I don't, that's not a safe place to be internally. So now, Chef, you pivot towards writing. Was writing always in you? Like, how did you unearth that passion and drive and skill set?
Sure. One of the first opportunities I got to write was maybe 2016. So I'm a relatively new writer. I don't know that I ever thought of writing as a potential career path. I certainly thought about or really was attracted to cooking and culinary space. Thinking back to it, the thing that I love so much about this industry and about this work is that it really is storytelling, right? Like, you are composing a dish and it's telling someone something, it's communicating something to someone else. And so I think that Joe Randall many years ago talked to a group of us about writing, not so much writing, but sort of storytelling, or necessity for getting the skill sets to be able to be more expansive in your storytelling. And he thought he meant it with reference to sort of the spaces of food studies that were sort of emerging. But I think that it all lends itself to this notion of how you express yourself. And any good chef, I think, is going to be a natural writer. Certainly, you should fortify your skills with sort of technical training in some way, and just the physical practice of it will get you better at it. But I don't know. I think that it's a much more natural transition than I thought it would be.
Okay.
But I really just think of it as extension of storytelling. But to answer your question more fully, I think the value and the power in storytelling and writing specifically became apparent when I realized that there were stories that weren't being told, that there was so much food content immersion from folks who had no culinary expertise. And especially when it came to talking about Black food culture, there was just so much missed, so much nuance missed, because folks weren't considering the context of being in the midst of it professionally. Wow. So it's like you want that said Toni Morrison, right? Like, if there's a story that you don't see, you have to tell it, right? Like you are deputized now to tell it.
No, absolutely. Wow, you just inspired me, literally, because prior to the show, you and I were just talking about, and I feel there's some stories. I know there's some stories inside of me that need to be told, in addition to my work, right? My body of work speaks for itself over the last 35 years. But even that, there's still additional stories that need to be told. And you just, you challenged me to challenge myself to do, possibly do the writing, because I just don't see myself as a writer. But I do see myself as a storyteller, and I do have stories to tell. So, I'm sure there might be others that are listening and watching this now that you have also just inspired. And I thank you. I thank you. So let's take us on a little deep journey into this culinary history that you've identified. Some of it you've unearthed, some of the stories, just walk us through what you've witnessed and where you are and where you're going to go with, your work.
Sure. So there are a couple things. One, it is absurd to me that we talk about American gastronomy without ever mentioning the names of the bodies and the hands that crafted it. Mm-hmm. So much of when we talk about Black culinary history gets contextualized in the life of the enslaved. Our foodways get reduced to the sort of making a way out of no way narrative that centers deprivation and centers lack of agency. Think about someone like a Michael Twitty. He literally enrolls the life and the clothing and the practices of the enslaved, not to be a minstrel, not to fetishize trauma, like Black trauma. It is to put into proper context the life and the work of the enslaved who literally crafted the food that we think of as American cuisine, right? You can't talk about our foodways without talking about the African diaspora. It's a terminology that's getting thrown around a lot, and we sort of tangentially think of the African continent and its multitude of languages and foodways as this homogenous thing. The slave trade, if the value of interrogating the slave trade tells us so much about why our food developed the way it did. You literally see patterns that draw. You can't talk about Senegal without talking about the Low Country. You can't talk about Nigeria without talking about the sort of Mid-Atlantic region. There is no mistake in the way that American foodways develop. The industrialization of our foodways certainly brought in multitudes of cultures, right? No one is suggesting that American cuisine is solely the birthright of African Americans, but this multicultural story that leaves out the contribution of the African diaspora it's just a lie, right? And it's one that we perpetuate when we don't stand up in the truth of where our agency shows up.
Wow.
The work I do is very interested in the professional landscape.
Right.
how our foodways develop in personal homes and the mores of marginalized people in the Eastern Seaboard through Manifest Destiny out west. All those stories in terms of migration are important. But I think the clearest places that we're able to see Black agency in American gastronomy is where the professional landscape is developing. The places that no one else wanted to be part of. Up until 1977, this was a domestic trade.
Work.
A chef like Jacques Pepin comes to this country, cooking all over France, is a revered chef, and he comes here and he's a domestic worker until 1977. So that tells us, those are clues that tell us about who was valued, how this industry, how this work was revered. Right. And while it was a castaway, while it was, like a throwaway industry, you see Black and brown hands all throughout this country, crafting beautiful, thoughtful, culturally diverse cuisine.
Right.
How do you get a generation and a half removed from that and tell a story that disempowers Black life completely? Right. So the starting point for me was, that's clearly a lie. I know intuitively. How do I find the receipts of the truth? Right. I think parts of it is reading folks who give us clues, right? Like the big problem is that a lot of our history isn't recorded in its typical ways. And so you have to sort of look for disparate clues. I think someone like a Du Bois, right? The Philadelphia Negro gives us massive insight into the agency of Black chefs in Philadelphia. And if it's true in Philadelphia, then it's true in Atlanta, and it's true in Boston, it's true in New York and Chicago, right? That we can look at this. Now you learn through that book how to find census records that give you demographics in other cities, right? You sort of think about the mobility that culinary life gave to chefs throughout generations, right? The 1800s so much of the agency to be fine in chefs is sort of that early 20th century, the sort of industrialization of our food system, the advent of restaurants, the sort of all of these spaces, we literally had full agency, if not agency in this country, certainly in our work. Absolutely. And so again, the stories we want to tell about mobility, about possibility, have to be recontextualized once you look at it through the lens of our food system. Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. Powerful information, powerful stuff. And I appreciate your candidness in terms of how you are breaking it down and delivering the message. So in terms of where you stand with your message and your business, I'm gonna call it a business model because, for you now writing, right? We talked a little bit earlier. So you were private chefing, but now you feel like writing is going to pay your bills in the future. So that, that business model, where are you going with that? So here's the thing too. So the landscape of freelance writing is one thing. The landscape of book publishing is one thing. And also the space of the best example or best sort of corollary would be sort of culinary anthropology. Verda Grosvenor gave us that language, right? Verda Grosvenor, vibration cooking, one of our country's first culinary anthropologists. You see so clearly Boston University, Spelman University, NYU. You see so many programs that are developing over the last decade and certainly over the last 5 years that are thinking critically about the necessity of food culture, that it gives us clues about the rest of the culture, right? Like you can't talk about really any aspect of anyone's culture without thinking about their food ways. Right. Your point about business model to me has been about, honestly, the last 10 years has been my de facto graduate school. There are no programs that exist to teach me to do the things I do and the work I do. Again, the only examples of people I know who are working in the space that I want to be a part of is a Michael Twitty, self-trained scholar, a Tony Martin, who's a journalist first, Jessica B. Harris, who's we think of her whole life in food, but the food had been her like side gig for 50 years of her career. She was an English professor,
right.
Had a day job, 50 years as a sort of parallel to her life in food. So there is no real blueprint right now. What I will say is that the world of freelance writing, especially in the food world, is critical right now.
Right.
We need chefs. We need folks who are in these spaces who can make their presence conditional at a publication to tell stories. A publication like Bon Appetit, a publication like, I don't know, like the New York Times even. Right. There are going rates for per word count on your content. Are you prepared to tell those kinds of stories? Are you ready to write? If you are, then I don't know any freelance writer who makes all their money off freelance writing. Right. A writer, I mean, there are plenty of New York Times bestselling authors who have multiple streams of income. And I think there's also something really, special about the culinary world kind of prepared me to be able to hustle, right? This, we have always had to have multiple streams of income, right? In the culinary world, and it's nothing new under the sun. So. Right now, certainly freelance writing is part of it. I contribute to books. I'm an essayist. I'm working on my own book project, so potentially selling a book will be another form of income. Right. But I just think you sort of think about a sort of life in sort of food cult, like the cultural aspect of food, as a multidisciplinary, multiple stream of income endeavor. Right. And it's like when the cotton is high, you bank money. When it's not, you have time to research and think and do other things. Right, right.
Can you speak about the work you're doing with the Culinary Institute of America right now?
Yes. So every Saturday for the last 6 weeks and the next 4, we've been thinking about, this has been something that's been on my spirit for a long time, and I'm sure many other people. Dr. Jessica B. Harris is shepherding this project that is interrogating the food of the African Atlantic. We call it the food of the African diaspora, the food of Africa and its American diaspora. So thinking about the continent and the African Atlantic and basically everywhere the diaspora touches. Mm-hmm. It is a 10-week course that is going to turn into a curriculum-based course. But this is sort of test run. It's going to be available via Great Courses. And it spent the first 3 weeks thinking about the continent. We're spending the next 4, the last 3, the next 2 in the Caribbean. So Spanish, French, and French speaking Caribbean, Brazil, and I think that was it. And then Kevin Mitchell and I are going to tackle the U.S. for the last 2 weeks. And it really is this sort of starting point. I don't know that anybody has all the answers about how to really contextualize our foodways fully, right? You have to start someplace. So this course is an attempt to sort of get us thinking geographically, thematically, and diasporically about our foodways, and to have better language for how you constitute, how you express our culture in sort of concrete ways. So dope. It's hour-long lectures with 3-hour practicum.
Wow. Yeah, I want to commend you for it, and Chef Mitchell and Dr. Harris and many other, and even the Culinary Institute of America for recognizing that this is necessary, this is needed. Yep. No matter, better late than never. We clearly could go back and throw stones, but we want to definitely commend the CIA and everybody involved for reaching out to you guys and having you do that. For me, on the economic side, so I'm the guy that says, okay, $3 trillion industry, right? We're talking 400 years of contribution and exclusion and systemic exclusion, like just racism. All right, let's quantify these reparations, right? Like, do we dare say reparations when it comes to Black food service professionals? We clearly know that the Food Network did not exist. We clearly see what's happening with it now. We clearly see multiple non-people of color have multiple shows. So not only just give one guy one show, like there's people with 5, 6, 7 shows of the same individual, which leads to book deals, which leads to restaurant franchising, which leads to catering deals, which leads to intellectual property, which leads to copyright. I mean, just all of these other ways that we are forced to hustle to monetize our wealth, right? Our abilities, our knowledge, our skill sets. So I'm the guy that's going to be like, okay, help me quantify this so that we can see the financial hidden figures, right, behind all of this.
So
it's a lot to unpack, I know, but
it is a lot to unpack, and I guess I answer this in 2 ways. One of which is, if you ask me, if we had this conversation even 2 years ago, I would have sort of said, I'm not the person to worry about that, because I create a very Black, very insular space that maybe is not as big a piece of the relative financial pie, sort of on a macro level, right, as it could be, but it is so profoundly interested in a community with Black folks and not interested in translating that to anybody else. And that's so much of what you're talking about, is being in spaces that ask you to make those sorts of compromises. Mm-hmm. Ask me that now, though. I think the thing I'm seeing more clearly is that the power of I guess I still kind of push back on being maybe less about reparations and more about being so clear-eyed about what you're asking for. Mm-hmm. I think about it relative to, I'm working on 2 separate documentary projects that are essentially trying to leverage expertise, leverage intellectual property, leverage how fly Black people are, how clear our culture is, how definitive it needs to be in ethos and in focus. So it's going to be all Black everything, because we need to be sure that every layer of context is taken care of. How do I leverage that at an HBO, at a Netflix, where you are unaccustomed to deferring to Black agency, right? You are unaccustomed to not having to have your fingers in every aspect of the thing you're not equipped to shepherd. I think that's a conversation that's getting a lot easier. Mm-hmm. I think that I think about somebody like Therese Nelson is someone who has her own stories of disproportionate struggle with getting a space like Netflix to defer to her. But she did her deal, her first project. The world loves it. And now she's able to sort of say, move out of my way and just let me be dope. Right. What would it look like if we were less beholden to asking for permission and making our presence conditional when we out in these spaces? Right. In the freelance world. Right. The thing I have learned most assuredly is that most of these institutions don't know what they're talking about, have no real reference point for mores, right? If COVID has taught us nothing else, it's taught us that all these rules are arbitrary, that you all are making things up as you go along. Right. And so coming to the table, certainly with a degree of best practices and understanding the landscape. I'm not going to walk into a meeting with a production company trying to produce a documentary with no understanding of the landscape. That means I need to be in community with folks who have better information than I do, who can give me game on what that language looks like. Right. But there also just has to be a sense of confidence and authority in what you have to say. Right. This world of culture, especially Black food culture, is so much about, in my opinion, about a defensive posture of not knowing enough to stand in that kind of authority. Right. That if you are timid about who and what you are and your authority to tell your truth, right, and to tell story in that way, then of course I'm going to get bulldozed. Of course a space is not going to defer to my sort of authority. Right. And so for me, at least, it's been about the internal part of knowing enough to be able to make my presence conditional, but also not being so beholden to these spaces. Your point about media, right? I'm thinking about Steven Satterfield. Like West Stone Media, people laughed at Steven in the early days of West Stone. Oh, this is a crowdsourced magazine. Oh, this is not Bon Appetit. Oh, it's not, you know, it's only coming out yearly. It's, you know, it's not glossy. That magazine is one of the most profoundly beautiful food magazines we have. It's parlayed his work into podcasting, into all manners of media in a way that people have to defer to his agency now, because he had the fortitude to believe and bet on himself and bet on culture in that way. I don't know that a lot of folks had that kind of fortitude. And I don't know that I'm the person to talk about any kind of pieces to these people's pie that does not ask for equity stake in what we create.
No, absolutely. Yeah, and that equity piece is important. That creativity, that freedom, that knowledge, the ability to create it and tell our story correctly is very important. And I'm moving in that direction too with some other projects that I'm working on. So I would love to collaborate with you on those in the very, very, very near future, because I will tie the economics to it, just so that we're aware going forward. Do I think we're going to get reimbursed, reparations, or paid for all the things that we've been excluded from? No, but going forward, I'm clearly teaching the next generation that these things matter. These are the things that you need to sit down and understand when you're negotiating deals and leases and book deals, intellectual property, all of those things. So I am the guy that's going to quantify it and have quantified it and will continue to quantify and put it out there. Because like you say, 35, when I started, I graduated CIA in 90, and in 92 we started, an organization for Black chefs, same issues. We've come this far, and no one has narrowed that gap. National Restaurant Association, all the publications, New York Times. Now James Beard does recognize some Black and brown people, people of color, but we're still economically, we're still not even at the table. Like we're not eating. We're getting the scraps, and that's a problem for me. And there wasn't even an appetite for what I was saying in '92. On both sides. Right, from white folks and from Black folks, because
that's my point. I swear, this is the point that I guess I'm wishing we talked more about. Yeah. I remember, first of all, let me just say, I remember being in culinary school, finding BCA Global. I remember the days of watching you guys sort of move through the world and sort of say the words to people about possibility. Right. That aside, it is so profoundly fascinating to watch us in this space where I'm an optimist in most things, right? I hope that I can only control what I can control. I think the internal work is much more valuable than asking systems to change that are so entrenched in their isms that they don't even see the forest for the trees. Right. That said, I'm watching so many Black-led organizations be so consumed with recognition, awards, all these things. We don't even have a baseline of a level set of information about who and what we are. Mm-hmm. So how about we put aside all of this conversation about replicating James Beard Foundation, why are we doing, what are we talking about here? What is that? How is that valuable to ensuring that we go forward with a appropriate level set? For a collective, I'm not saying that everyone. Again, the other part that we don't talk enough about is that not everybody is in this for the same reason that you talk about. So many organizations want to be this national hub for everybody. I personally don't see that that's possible. Mm-hmm. I think that what is more likely and more appropriate is that if we can get on a collective level set around this is who and what our culture is.
Yeah.
This is the starting place to sort of, I want you to be so bombastic. I want you to be so passionate, so thorough with your expression of what Haitian cuisine is. I need you to be so rigorous about Senegal. I need you to be such an ambassador for Jamaica that the cultural work is already being done.
Right.
If you start there, then all of a sudden, if we all orient in the same direction, if we all as completely entrenched and rigorous about our culture, defining it, amplifying it, teaching it, then now the next layer of work is to happen. That surely, if you're in community with folks who are doing dope work, you should talk about it, write about it, celebrate it. Right. But all of that can't happen until we start getting rigorous.
Yeah. No, discipline. And really, absolutely. Much applause. Let's get some applause right there. We went on a little, that was a 15, 20 minute deep dive there. But you hit every key component, every key point, and they're independent, but they're interrelated. And we can't have that discussion without having this discussion. And we can't accomplish moving forward without solidifying our history. And we gotta work collectively. We don't need more or new organizations. We need to work with the organizations that already exist. We need to collaborate more with each other and forget about, like you say, the awards, the followers and all those other things, because now you got a lot of static. You got a lot of noise out there. Everyone and anyone with a cell phone is now a blogger, you know what I mean, and wants to be an influencer. But all you're really doing, you don't have the foundation and the knowledge to really talk about the culturally, what does this mean, right? And instead of acquiring that knowledge and being disciplined and reach, and doing it the correct way, he's just trying to get likes and more followers, and it's counterproductive and it's disruptive to those that are really out here, trying to capture who we are and what we do and elevate and recognize it. So I appreciate you. I appreciate your work. How can people get in touch with you? We got about 10 more minutes and we'll wind down.
Sure. So my website, blackculinaryhistory.com, is alive and well. We are relaunching it in another week. It sort of existed as this kind of repository, right? My thought was originally, if you should not have to ask me where to start. Here are 200 plus books you can start from. Right. Read one. Right. Like, if you on YouTube watching shenanigans, here are, 100 hours of Jessica Harris, Verda May. There's nothing, all of the dopest content that's available for YouTube. Here you go. Right. Here are the podcasts that we listen to that we think are brilliant. Right. And then I'm really kind of having more time now, but going to start blogging more. So the website certainly is a starting point. I am so mystified because we started my Facebook group around the same time. So we're 12 years old, and the kind of community that has been built in this space. Michael Twitty funds his whole Southern Discomfort Twitter. It becomes the cooking gene. People have literally opened restaurants, gotten booked, all this, just being in community with one another in the Facebook group. But people don't realize that in the group, we have a whole website that is all the resources you keep asking me for. So there's that. And then on other socials everywhere, I'm Black Culinary. So you can find me and reach out. And I'm pretty responsive. I answer all the questions. I get most of the service. Most of what I do through the site is answering questions for people, and it helps me because it sort of level sets, so sort of focuses my research mainly to deep dive for people. But it's a lot of parents wanting me to talk to or about the young people coming to this industry. Mm-hmm. A lot of folks who just want to start in place, and I think you made a point that I think is fair about sort of people's imaginations or sort of attention spans or discipline in this industry. But I think one of the things that I've been conditioned to give grace to is that a lot of time what you're hearing from people, especially Black people in this work, is this profound feeling of being invisible in in media spaces, not having yourself reflected back, needing to have a sense of authority, agency, right? And it's sort of a lot of what you're hearing is defensiveness, or sort of this hunger for feeling affirmed. Mm-hmm. And is it productive? Not necessarily, because it typically sort of distills down into ego, which, I mean, can't really can't judge people's ego. But I think that when we cloak personal ambition and ego in sort of community, it's a dangerous thing, because I think it perverts some of the saliency of sort of cultural rigor in a way that allows for you to distort the reality of this work. You can't talk about progress in a way to dismiss progress because it's not served you personally. Right. Is an offense, in my opinion, to small, steady, sustainable strides that are continuously being made. And so I just would love us if we could collectively divorce ego from culture.
You and me both. Like I said, I go back to 92, 93, and we're still in the same position in 2021. And that's because the organizations created then became directed by people that had different agendas and ego and personal agendas that weren't for the good of the whole culture and for our industry as a whole, which is why, I don't publicly disrespect any of them, but I don't privately respect them either, because I was talking about this shit in 92 and I'm still talking about it. And, nobody, and I blame myself, because I went off the grid there for a while because I got discouraged. And I got discouraged with my own people to a certain degree, because they just didn't understand. They was playing checkers while everybody else was playing chess. And, it wasn't a good thing. But having said that, chef writer Therese Nelson, you're a phenomenal person, and your energy is phenomenal. Clearly, the work that you were doing as a steward of Black culinary history, I admire and I respect, and you inspire me, and I want to thank you for taking time today to come on my show, which I feel like I'm honored to have you. And if you have any final parting words that you want to leave with people, including, again, how do people get in touch with you again? But what do you want to leave them with?
Just start someplace. Our food culture is so profound and so beautiful. There's so many stories and so many clues left to us about how to be more effective in our own work, culturally, collectively as well. You can't talk about any real era of significance in this country without talking about Black people and their sort of contributions, especially in the food world, right? Like, from organizing to civil rights movement to best practices in entrepreneurship, our stories are everywhere, and they are right there for us to sort of consume. And so I just invite people to start someplace. Yep. Pick a figure, right? Thursdays and every other Sunday off is Vertimer Grosvenor's second book, 1972. Dr. Grosvenor literally told us that we were going to have to contend with rethinking the food system, rethinking the professional culinary landscape. In 72, she wrote these words for us. Right. And it's a shame that they feel timely right now, but it's a book I wish more people read, because it's profound. Right. Anybody professionally doing this work.
Right, absolutely. Well, Chef, thank you again. As we wind down, I want to thank our sponsors, Cornerstone Business Labs, Cornerstone Production, and Cornerstone Media. Without them, none of this would be possible. My name is Jason Wallace. I'm the restaurant scientist, and thank you for watching another episode of Hidden Figures Behind the Numbers. Until we meet again, power to the people. Drop that beat there, Marv.